Alright everyone, this is Arnie from IELTS making a new video. Today I'd like to talk about what you can do before you start your test, and also what to expect during the test and when you finish your test. Now, when you are preparing for the test, there's a lot of material to choose from. I don't have any particular recommendations to make. When it comes to some of the major publishers of books, I think they're all pretty much the same. But some of the material that's online seems to be a little dubious, I would say. Those books that claim that by following their steps you can get a 9 for the speaking test, when you see material that make claims like that, I think it's best to take it with a grain of salt. Now, the IELTS test is a proficiency test, meaning that it's designed to test how proficient you are in a language. Now, it's certainly possible to increase your band score by learning some test-taking skills, knowing the format of the test, knowing what to expect before you step into the examination room. But it takes months of language practice to improve your score by even just one band. And I mean language practice, not skills practice. So, not just vocabulary and grammar. These two skills are perhaps the easiest ones to improve. And there's definitely a lot of material available on improving your grammar, improving your vocabulary. But that's not enough, because I see so many candidates who are either undergraduate or graduate students, or who are at work, and who've had years of study, English study, but they can't express themselves very coherently in the test. I think part of the problem is perhaps the students and maybe the teachers themselves, those who teach IELTS, don't familiarize themselves with the criteria of the test. So there are 4 criteria. Firstly, there's fluency and coherence, there's lexical resources, there's grammatical range and accuracy, and then pronunciation. So the first one, fluency and coherence, this criteria refers to your ability to talk at normal levels, continually, the rate and effort, and your ability to link your language together to form coherent, connected speech. The key indicators of fluency are speech rate and speech continuity. The key indicators of coherence are logical sequencing of sentences, clearly marking the stages of the discussion, the narration of your argument, and the use of cohesive devices, for example, connectors, pronouns, and conjunctions, within and also between sentences. Now, I'm going to play you a sample response of a candidate to a Task 2 prompt.
Okay, I'm going to tell you about a building I know quite well, and I really like it, actually. Actually, it's in my hometown, Abu Dhabi, and the name of this building is the Capital Gate building. It's quite a new building, only a few years old, but already it has become an important landmark because it's really unusual in its appearance. The first thing you notice is that it leans over to one side. It's like the building in Italy, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Only that building is leaning because it's too old. This one is leaning because it was the architect's design. Actually, it's very strange. It's a skyscraper. It's very modern looking, a really cutting-edge design, you know. It doesn't really have any sharp corners. It has lots of curves. And it is all glass on the outside. Okay, moving on to what it's used for. Well, there is a hotel inside and maybe some apartments too. And I think there are some offices as well, but I'm not exactly sure. Finally, the reason why I like it is, well, I guess it's because it's unique. It's special. Also, I'm interested in architecture, especially modern architecture, and I'm quite fascinated by how the building stays up. I mean, it doesn't fall down. I think it's because the building has a steel frame, and I heard it also has very deep foundations. So, if you visit my city, I'd recommend that you see this building. That's all, actually.
Thank you. Do other people like this building?
Yes, everyone likes it. It's a real landmark of the city now.
Thank you. Can I have the task card and the paper and pencil, please?
Yes, sure.
And we'll notice that he uses a proper introduction by saying, I'm going to tell you about a building I know quite well. Now, he overuses the discourse marker actually. You will notice he uses that quite often, too much. He uses but and only as connectors to link his ideas. And he clearly marks the stages of his response with phrases such as, the first thing you'll notice, okay, moving on to what it's used for, finally, so, in conclusion. So his response is generally quite fluent. There is some repetition, but no long hesitations, where he searches for words or content. It's similarly quite coherent in that it's logically structured and easy to understand. Now, regarding the second criteria, lexical resources, this criteria refers to the range of vocabulary the candidate can use, and the precision with which meaning and attitudes can be expressed. The key indicators are the variety of words used, the adequacy and appropriacy of the words used, and your ability to paraphrase. If there are some words that you might not know how to say in English, how well are you able to get around this gap in your vocabulary? Now, for the lexical resource criteria, to get a good score in that, what is really necessary is that you need to be able to collocate and use collocations well, words that go together. So, for example, when we talk about appointments, we don't say take an appointment, we would say you make an appointment. And we make mistakes, not do mistakes. So in this example we just looked at, we saw the candidate say, it leans over to. Leans over collocates with to. And then, especially for Chinese first language speakers, notice that the candidate said there is a hotel inside, not there have a hotel inside. Now, as far as colloquial speech goes, the Oxford Dictionary defines this as belonging to common speech characteristic of or proper to ordinary conversation, as distinguished from formal or elevated language. So the speech is quite informal, and it's not used in writing, it's used in speaking. So it's everyday language, language that people would use in everyday conversation, which is what you should be aiming for, natural speech, not academic speech. So for example, when we talk about something that makes you sick, or you are sick of something, or you are fed up with something, those would be examples of colloquial speech. Now, our sample didn't really contain any such examples, and he also didn't really use any idiomatic language. Now, the third criteria is grammatical range and accuracy. This criteria contains two aspects, range and also accuracy. A range refers to the length and complexity of the spoken sentence. Whether you appropriately use subordinate clauses, the range of your sentence structures, and your ability to move elements around for information focus. Grammatical accuracy is judged by the number of grammatical errors and the communication effect of these errors. So in our sample, the speaker's response is relatively error-free. But the response contains numerous sentences of the kind like subject is object, and subject has object variety. Now, for Chinese first language speakers, articles and the correct use of prepositions are often problem areas in terms of accuracy. So it's probably a good idea to spend some time focusing on when to use the appropriate articles and when to use the appropriate prepositions. And for the second aspect, the range, grammatical range, the easiest way to improve your range is to use things like the passive voice, conditional sentences, and relative clauses. And then the fourth and last criteria, pronunciation. This refers to the ability you have to produce intelligible speech, comprehensible speech. How easy is it for the listener to understand what you're saying? Now, how comprehensible your speech is depends on the amount of meaning that's conveyed by the pronunciation features you use. These features include things like chunking, stress, intonation, and rhythm. The key indicators will be the amount of strain that is placed on the listener, the amount of speech that they can clearly understand, and also the influence of your first language on your pronunciation. Now, pronunciation is the most difficult criteria to improve on, especially if you are using books as your only method of preparation. It can be the hardest aspect to learn of. It can be the hardest aspect to master when learning English, and can also be one of the factors that might be preventing you from getting a high score on the IELTS test. Now, the only really practical way in which you can improve your pronunciation is to observe the way that native speakers naturally use, especially intonation. Now, watching movies and actively noticing the intonation is helpful, but of course, it will be even more helpful if you could get a native speaker to help you practice with. Now, if you don't have anybody like that to help you, maybe you could get together with some friends, see if you could practice together. And if that doesn't work, at least you could try to record your own voice. Listen back to that. You might be surprised by how you sound. Now, right before the test, so imagine you've completed your preparation. You've registered for the test. The writing test will be held in the morning, the speaking test after that, usually about 1 o'clock. You will start the speaking test. The staff at your test center will inform you of the exact time that you need to be there for the speaking test. And in the waiting room, they'll explain the rules to you, such as that you're not allowed to take a watch into the examination room, you need to take your passport, things like that. Then when it's your time, they will tell you that you can go into the examination room. Now, by the time that you get to the examination room, the examiner will already be ready, so just knock on the room and you can enter. They'll ask you to enter and to please have a seat, so just go in and sit down. Now, I see some people sitting in the waiting area doing some last-minute preparation with some material, doing some revision or preparation or whatever it is they're doing for the speaking test. Now, I understand that for some people this might just be a way of dealing with their anxiety. They feel very nervous about the speaking test, so they feel that they're actually doing something helpful. But do you really think that a few minutes of preparation for a proficiency test is going to make a difference? I think it might be a better idea to just try to relax before you test, but of course how you spend your time is up to you. Now, when entering the room, it doesn't hurt to be friendly to the examiner, but you also don't have to be overly formal by calling the examiner sir, or even repeatedly calling him sir if it happens to be a man. Some examiners might see this as you trying to influence them, and there's really no point. Now, all the test sessions are recorded, and in the beginning of your test, the examiner will record some information, such as your candidate number, the date, their name, and they also have a number. It's just part of the process. So they might seem to be ignoring you when you sit down at first, but don't worry, this is something they have to do. Now, while the examiner is recording this information, there's no need for you to agree to what they're saying by saying yes or that's right. It's just for administrative purposes. Now, right after this part, the examiner will greet you and introduce themselves. Then they'll ask you for your full name. Now, it's not necessary to give them your actual name, your Chinese name, and then also to go on to say something like, I also go by Mary, or whatever, or you can call me Jeff. Your chosen English name is never going to come up during the test, and the examiner is very unlikely to call you by your chosen English name, even at the end of the test where they're saying goodbye. Now, naturally, a lot of people feel very nervous. The examiners know that you feel nervous. Speaking in a foreign language can be very stressful. You will see some people visibly tremble when they speak, and their hands tremble when they're writing notes for part 2. They might speak in a quavering voice. It's a stressful experience. But telling the examiner that you are nervous is probably not going to accomplish much. They realize that this is a stressful experience, and they will try to make you feel at ease as much as possible. So telling them, oh, I feel very nervous, is probably not going to get you any special consideration. And another thing, the volume of your voice. Please keep in mind that depending on the size of the examination room, you might be sitting quite close to the examiner. Here in Taoyuan, the rooms tend to be quite small. So please keep in mind that there's no need to really speak in a loud voice. After 40 minutes, the examiner's ears are going to be ringing. And at the same time, especially if the room is quite big, make sure that you're speaking loud enough to be clearly heard. Now, when finishing the test, when the test is over, the examiner will tell you, thank you, that's the end of the speaking test. Goodbye. Now again, there's nothing wrong with being friendly and saying goodbye as you leave, but it's probably not necessary to say something like, well, thank you for your time, or wish you have a great day, something like that. The examiners do get paid for this job, so there's probably no need to thank them for their time. Please don't just leave the test center after you finish your speaking test. The administrative staff need to give you some documentation before you leave. Now, in the next video, I'll be looking at more specific parts of the test.